Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll give it a few more minutes as people start coming into the room. And we are recording today's event. So if for some reason you lose your internet connection or you get bumped off, we will be sending out a link to the recording as well as a Master Gardener survey with the follow-up email. We're asking everybody today to please use the Q&A to ask your questions so we can keep track of those as people are asking questions. And don't forget, we're open for curbside. So Tuesdays through Saturdays, you can pick up books and return books at the library. You can place books on hold through our catalog computers, or if you're not so computer savvy, give us a call and we'll put things on hold for you if they're available. We try to make sure that they're out there really quickly, but give us some time too. If we don't answer the phone, please leave a message. There's only a few of us here and sometimes we're outside and we don't hear the phone ring, or we're in the stacks trying to find books for people. So please be patient with us. There's a few of us, but we're trying to make sure that everybody gets what they're looking for. Today's event is in partnership with the UC Master Gardeners of Marin and the Commons Foundation, and the Zoom is made possible by the Friends of the Larkspur Library. So again, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. And again, too, if you missed other events that we've done in the past, you can all find most of them on our YouTube channel. There are a few that we weren't able to record or we had technical difficulties, and so they're not on there. So, but for the most part, all of our events that we've been doing since May are on our YouTube channel. So we'll give it one more moment. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director here at the Larkspur Library. And today we're here with UC Marin Master Gardener Joe Jennings and my favorite person, the president of the Commons Foundation. It's been a big help for the library this year. But he's here today to talk about fall citrus gardening. So let's hand it over to you, Joe. And I'm going to disappear here, but I'm in the background if you guys need me.
So Franklin, I had one question. If
Sure.
I ask the people here who does not live in Marin County, if they can raise their hand, can they do that?
Oh, I think so. Let me double check.
So friends, I'm just trying to get a sense of if there are people from outside Marin or outside of state, because there are some places to be modifying. Are any of you from not from Marin County?
So right now we have 2 hands, 3 hands raised, 4.
Oh, good.
Oh, wait, and let me do that poll too, because I have that poll. We're supposed to keep track of how many Marin Master Gardeners here.
Okay.
So for our Marin Master Gardeners, please fill out this poll real quick. And if you're not, you can click the no too. But thank you for raising your hand. So we do have a few non-Marin, and I know we have lots of Master Gardeners who are joining us from other areas in the state and across the country. So thank you for joining us.
So I'm going to dive in, and my knowledge as we go north drops like a rock, but I'll try and help out. I'm going to put up a screen here, which I hope you all can see. Is that working okay, Franklin?
Yeah.
So this is the fall winter citrus gardening class. I wanted to first explain, UC Marin Master Gardeners, we're part of the Cooperative Extension Office for the UC, and our job is to transfer horticultural knowledge and information to civilians, non-professionals, and we work across we work virtually across a very wide range of ways of getting to people. So if you have a question on your garden, you can email our help desk, because that is still operational. The office is not open, but we can help you if you have questions. So that email at helpdesk@Marin, I can't see the rest of but that would be where I would go if you have any questions. I'm Joe. I'm the one in the middle there. I'm Joe Jennings. I'm a Larkspur a Marin County resident and gardener since 2009. I went through the Marin Master Gardener program in 2012. I teach tomatoes, year-round vegetables, container vegetables, and citrus trees. I'm originally from Seattle, University of Washington, and Whitman College. And today I wanted to sort of focus on three things: maintenance, integrated pest management, and planting a new citrus tree as your fall, winter citrus gardening sort of scope. So let's start with maintenance. Basically, it's harvest season for a bunch of our varieties. And it starts in October for these. And in the case of the lemons, it's year round, but for oranges and limes and mandarins, one of the things you need to be thinking about is picking the fruit when it's ripe now. And so and the best place to store fruit is on a tree, but don't want to get ahead of you and start to drop and rot. So as a form of maintenance, you can legitimately say, oh, I need to be out harvesting more. Limequats and orangequats are also in right now. So you see sort of starting in December, October, in some cases year round, all of these things, all of these varieties come in. So that's the first thing in maintenance, harvest. The second thing is make sure that you keep the ground under your trees free of leaves and debris and fallen fruit. One way to encourage rats and critters to get underneath your tree and start climbing the tree is to have fallen fruit. And debris under the tree, if there's any diseases, that's not helping. And I'll get into more detail why you want to make sure you've done your cleanup. But that would be, so first off, harvest. Second, cleanup. And then third, and this is particularly for Marin County, but everybody in Northern California should be thinking about this. If your citrus tree is within 0 to 5 feet of your house, it's way too close. If it's within 5 to 30 feet, you should have a dwarf tree. And 30 to 100 feet, the tree should be spaced out apart. So I put this picture here because this is a house near me where the citrus tree is literally about a foot from the foundation and growing up underneath the eaves, and it creates a fire ladder. So if you missed our Fire Smart landscaping class from earlier this summer, this link at Marin Master Gardener's Fire Smart Landscaping will give you a sense of the zones. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is we're still in fire season. So please be careful. And if you have a bug to go do maintenance, this is a good time to clear out and clean out and pull away from the house any citrus tree. And there are just an awful lot of them that are right against the buildings. This is not the time to do pruning. You want to prune in the spring or summer. So leave your trees alone from a pruning standpoint unless you're doing the fire safe, fire smart pruning what I talked about before. This is a time for feeding. So I add 2 inches of compost annually out to the drip line under all of our citrus and keep it about 4 to 6 inches from the trunk of the tree. And I also add citrus fertilizer, a 646 organic fertilizer, basically 4 times a year. And so right now would be the time to add compost and the citrus fertilizer. And again, keep it away from the base and out to the drip line. Now is the time to do your feeding. And this watering, I'll bet you everyone's ground is dry. And I mean dry. And so traditionally, citrus trees, the water needs go down, but we're still this year in 90-degree weather here in Marin County. So check your soil, and you may want to do a deep soaking as we wait for the rains, because it's very, very dry. Lastly, this is the time to refresh your mulch. Keep it away from the trunk, keep it about 2 inches thick. That will keep down your weeds and it will reduce the evaporation. And this is also an important time to make sure you've done weeding. Keep the weeds down because they affect the growth of the tree and they affect the production of the tree. So that was it in a nutshell. Franklin, are there any questions about maintenance?
So far, there's one about yellowing at leaf drops, and
That's
then
coming up.
speaking about citrus growing in containers, which are going to probably come up later.
Right,
So.
Rhoda, the leaf yellowing is coming up in IPM, which is the next section, and containers is coming up in the section after that, Christine, so I'll be back to you. Any other questions, just purely what to do maintenance-wise right now? Okay, I'll move on. So, let me get rid of the screen here, sorry. Oh. There was a question on transplants. I'll get to that in a few minutes. And okay, so now we're into pest management.
Or I was going to say, Jane has a feeding every 3 months or at other times. She's asking that. There's a feeding question.
Yeah, if you go back, I'm sorry, I cannot figure out how to get rid of this screen now. This is crazy.
Does the back button work, Joe?
No, I mean the questions.
Oh, here, you just minimize it.
Anyway, there was a question on fertilizing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it 3 to 4 times a year, sort of on the quarter. And the idea is these trees are heavy feeders. So when you get to a mature tree, you're putting out about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of nitrogen a year. So you want to do that in sort of quarterly feeds. The compost I'm doing once a year, but the fertilizing I do quarterly.
It's the next one was there was a confusion about it said feeding in the winter. The slide said no.
I apologize then because I do it. It shouldn't say no. So the thing about, just before I leave it, the thing about citrus trees is at a certain level, you shouldn't be having to do that much pruning. But what you're trying to do is make sure that you've fed the tree and watered the tree and protected the tree. And as you go into fall, if it's a lemon, it's a year-round harvest, but the oranges and the other fruits are coming into harvest time. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but this is the time to be paying attention to your tree, or trees. And so I'm just trying to make sure that people clean up, whether it's a young tree or an older tree. Within a year or two of planting it, you're going to fall into this rhythm of quarterly feeding, annual compost, checking for weeds, making sure it's been watered enough. And particularly with the high temperatures we've been having, citrus trees love high temperatures, but they need a lot of water. And so you have to kind of stay on it. So let me move on. Integrated pest management. Now, for those of you who aren't master gardeners or may not have seen this term before, what I'd urge you to do is Google UC Davis pest management, and it will bring you to this page. And if you click on this home and garden turf, and then click on citrus trees, you will get all of the information of what environmental, insects and diseases and invertebrates affect citrus trees in California. And the reason to do this is an awful lot of the problems you might have with your trees, UC Davis can tell you how to handle it, in many cases at very low cost. without having to go into a nursery. You can, and then figure out what you need to order if you need supplies. So right now, believe it or not, what I see the most of, and it's very strange, is this high level of problems with trees that are not getting enough water. And there's just no other way to put it. It's a problem. And so if you're trying to do things with your garden, if you see this curling, this drought stressed, this curling, it means there's something wrong. I'm sorry, this is now, I've got to figure out a way to get rid of this screen. Pardon me for 1 minute there. And there, okay, now we're back. Now I can see the screens. Walking around the neighborhood in Larkspur, I see drought-stressed citrus trees all over the place. It's because it hasn't rained and it's been very hot, and moreover, it's been very dry. So make sure that you've irrigated your trees every 7 to 28 days, and that can be just put a soaker hose around them if you don't have drip irrigation. But this is very, very common this time of year because it's been dry for months. Another thing that's common and will be coming soon is frost protection. Now, this is Marin County, but whatever county you are in the United States, you should be able to look up when does frost start to occur. And you actually don't care about average nightly temperatures. What you care about is historic lows. And so in the county that we're in Marin County, historic lows start, frost risk starts in October, the month we're in, and it runs to May. And so pay attention to what's forecast to be your nightly temperature. And if you see it going to be below 29 degrees, then you should protect your trees. And the way to do it is to either have a sheet or some other kind of covering to put over the tree. Ideally, keep it off the leaves if possible. But this is the second big risk right now. One is the tree is drying out. Another is you get an early cold spell and you'll have frost damage. If you do have frost damage, remove the frozen fruit and do not prune immediately. Frankly, wait till May to see the extent of the damage because you could make it worse with early pruning. So this is the second issue in IPM. You could be seeing fertilizing problems. In fact, I noticed this in one of my trees this morning, which is if you're seeing yellow leaves or mottled leaves or older leaves turning yellow and drop, these are trace elements that the tree is missing. In one case, zinc, in another case, zinc, and in the third case, magnesium and manganese. So if you're doing additives and good fertilizing techniques, you should be addressing this. But if you see that for some reason, like your soil is short on iron, then make sure that you address it. If you're one of the people who use chicken or steer manure around your trees, don't forget they can be high in salt and burn the trees. So if you are going to use manure, make sure that you irrigate the soil thoroughly after you've spread it so that it leaches the salt away, and that is well composted manure because you don't want to burn the trees. In the county that we are in, we are most worried about this Asian citrus psyllid and Amaryllia, but also botrytis and scale. So this citrus psyllid is an import, and if you see anything that looks like this, it's happened once so far in the county, please call the exotic pest line. It will look like you'll see these critters and they're damaging the tree, and when in doubt, call the number. Amaryllia root rot is because there were older trees. If you're moving into a new subdivision and you plant your trees and 2 or 3 years later, they start to wither, it's actually a problem called oak root fungus. And here again, call the Cooperative Extension Office at Master Gardeners for help. Now, botrytis is extremely common, and you'll see this as we go into the winter. As it gets cooler and wetter, you'll see the fruit have these bumps. So it means that get rid of dead branches, remove the damaged fruit, and don't leave the fruit on the tree so long, but don't harvest when it's wet. So the symptoms are dead buds, twig and branch gummosis, and scarring of fruit. But this is, you can still eat the fruit, but this is not great. And then scale. These are sucking insects that then attach to bark and fruit and leaves, and they can seriously damage your host. So you can use ants, there are other parasites for them, or you can use horticultural oil, but check the UC IPM website to get an idea of what to use on your tree right now. The number one thing that people bring up in Marin County is invertebrates. They usually say rats or squirrels or raccoons. And I would suggest going to the IPM website and looking at your choices. There are humane ways to deal with critters, and there are less than humane ways to deal with critters. But particularly if you have fruit fallen on the ground, you're encouraging them to come up into your tree. And if your tree attaches or is adjacent to your house, you're now encouraging them to get up onto your roof and actually into your attic. So another reason to keep your trees away from the house and away from the roof is you don't want roof rats. So that was the IPM portion. Franklin, are there questions?
There's one about water usage. 30 gallons a week seems like so much.
It is a lot, but that's when you're looking at the water level. Let me bring that back up. I got this from standards for further south. So I'd argue that check with your local authorities. I put a soaker hose on once a month for an hour, and it's a significant amount of water. So play with it in your area. It also is a factor of how windy it is where you are and whether the soil retains water or not. Because if you have very heavy clays, the water can sit on the surface and not go down into the ground as well. So you need to check where you live, how that will work. Other questions?
Some of them, I'm not sure. Patricia Davis is asking about feeding again, but I'm not sure what trace elements is there particular type of fertilizer you use.
It's interesting. I look at the fertilizers, and the key is to make sure that you've got. Again, I'm sorry, everybody. I've got to get rid of. I should not look at the screen. Can't help myself. When you're looking at, you'll see 646, but what you want to see is it has all the minor nutrients, and there's a long list, because a lot of the problems that trees have is they're missing very specific minor nutrients. And in Marin County, where we live, there's virtually nothing in the soil already. It's just awful soil. So you're basically putting all the nutrients in a couple times a year.
So Matthew Lee was asking about a 4-year-old key lime. He has a good harvest, but they're all marble size to walnut. He wants to know how we could get bigger, the walnut size. Would that have to do with the feeding too, or?
That's a longer question. The limes should do well. It depends on where he lives and how much sun they get, and also how much heat. But I would try improving the feeding and the watering and see how it does. Other questions, Franklin?
Okay. What's a cost-effective way to measure nutrients of my soil?
Oh, I would check at the UC Master Gardener website. There are both kits you can buy and then services you can employ. You can spend a little bit of money or a lot of money on testing your soil. Depending upon where you live, you can also look up what was there originally, but most of these houses have brought in soil and added soil. So check at the UC Master Gardener for information on soil testing.
And Terry's had a tree that was chewed up by rats last winter, and he's surprised it survived the rats.
Right. Now, one trick is make sure if the tree is not against the house, if you put steel wool wrapped around the trunk of the tree for the first foot or two, most mice and rats will not climb on steel wool. They don't like it.
Then, Christina is asking, what should the pH for citrus?
No, I would check on the Master Gardener site. I apologize. I don't have it in my head.
And then Carol's asking that her blood oranges are more sour than tart.
Well, it's the sun that creates the sugar. So it would be a question of, is it getting enough sun, or have you fed it with enough nutrients, and or maybe it's just a sour tree. I don't know. That brings up the whole question of flavor, which is an incredible subject, but we can't do it today. But there's a whole raft of information on flavor in the citrus field. And one of the reasons that store-bought citrus sometimes has so little flavor is that they flood the fields about 2 weeks before harvest to maximize the weight of the fruit, because they're paid by the pound. And so when you buy store-bought fruit, it may have dramatically less flavor than the tree in your backyard.
So Rhoda's asking, how do we add manganese? It's one of the nutrients.
Right. Normally, I would do it with the regular feeding. And if that isn't enough, then I'd look to buy extra additive that just has that. But you can find it online.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So last winter, it looks like that lost every tree but no fruit. Why is my Meyer lemon is doing better? Some fruit and less than half has green leaves. I'm not sure what the question is, but.
Okay, well, Meyer lemons are traditionally, here's a good picture, the go-to citrus plant for Northern California. It's the most abundant producer, it's the hardiest, and also you can buy a dwarf version so it does well in containers. So if your Meyer lemon is the only one producing, that's a good sign. It's because it's probably the most robust plant we have for Northern California.
Okay, and then any difference for feeding or maintaining a young tree, more or less? It's in a container in Novato.
So we're about to go into containers, so hold that thought. In fact, that's a good transition. So one way to look at this is the perfect time to plant a new tree, fall, winter. And this is also the time, if you have a tree that's too tall or too old or not producing, this is the time to look at it and say, perhaps we should part. And you take out the old tree and then measure and make sure that you're far enough away from the house so you're fire smart, and plant a tree that's separated from the other trees. But this is the time to think about planting. So When you start thinking about planting a new tree, you need 6 hours of sunlight in February, and you want to plant between now and March with good sun and heat, good drainage, and if you're planting in a lawn, immediately remove 5 feet of sod from the trunk all the way around. Now, for those of you who are listening in from outside of Marin County, I changed this chart so that you all could see if you're in a USDA hardiness zone north of 8, and that means on the color chart here, it's where it starts to go slightly green to blue. You should be doing citrus trees in containers, as most citrus will suffer damage when exposed to prolonged freezing. So anywhere, if you're in an inland valley, anywhere where it gets cold and stays cold in the winter, citrus have to be in containers so you can bring them inside. If you're in zone 8 or better, you can be outside. Zone 8, you want to be along the side of the house so you can get reflection of heat. And zone 9, you can pretty much, you're out of the woods and put them anywhere in the yard, but pay attention and cover them in case of a cold snap. So this is sort of the macro. If it's a cold winter climate, you're in containers, so you can bring them in. If it has some cold but not too bad, you could be on the south side of your property, but keep an eye out for frost. And if it's a warmer climate, like most of Marin County, you can plant anywhere in the yard, but again, keep an eye out for frost. The number one problem people have with the tree selection is actually not the variety, it's the size. I have seen people plant standard orchard variety citrus in containers or in very small yards. So most of us should be in the semi-dwarf or dwarf, because let's face it, unless you want to go up on a ladder to harvest, you're not going to be climbing up into one of these tall trees, and most of us don't have the room. So when you go to the nursery, look for dwarf and semi-dwarf. And this chart, frankly, came from a combination of sources for Northern California and Marin. But what's changing, and the thing to pay attention to, is due to climate change, the warmer climates are heading north. So the number of things we can grow in Marin County is going to grow over the next decade. So if you're planting a tree, you should be thinking at the decade level anyway. So this list you can find at Marin Master Gardeners or Four Winds Nursery, or at Pam Pierce's Golden Gate Gardening. But this gives you an idea of what varieties we grow, what scion varieties, and then whether you can get them in a dwarf or a container scale plant. And the good news is this is just a wonderful cross-section of the citrus world. If you are in a cooler climate with more frost, you immediately go to a shorter list of trees. And then if you're planting it in a container, you're in a shorter list as well. I would argue a 25-foot tall tree in a container is a little bit hard to believe. But this comes from the Master Gardener's Handbook and Four Winds Growers, which, by the way, is a great resource for information on trees. But if you're looking at a variety for a container, buy the dwarf variety is the net. You do not want a full-size tree. So when you're selecting a tree, I know this sounds counterintuitive, because sometimes you'll see trees with fruit on them in the nursery. And what you want is the smallest tree. You have to be patient, but buy the smallest tree you can. It should be healthy looking with green foliage, no nicks or weird. Sometimes you see very weird pruning, like they sort of created a straight tree out of something else. And you must take a look to make sure there's no pest damage. Look in the soil for pests. And then when the nursery is not looking, turn it on its side and see if there are roots coming out the bottom. If the tree is probably root bound, I go find something that hasn't been in that small a container this long. It's my view of growing stuff is we actually grow the soil and the soil grows the stuff. So with citrus, you need well-drained soil. You need it needs to be loosely compacted, and so I keep adding compost and adding compost. They'll tolerate sandier soils, but the less nutrient capacity, that means that the tree will be getting less nutrients. Now you're compensating with fertilizer. Make sure there are no weeds, grasses, or ornamental plants underneath the tree within the drip line, because all those things detract from the nutrients going to the tree. And then I add compost every year, just religiously. In fact, I'm about to do it. So that the tree, as you go into the rainy season, the compost is there to rebuild the soil. This is one of the biggest changes from when many of us were kids. It used to be you were told, dig a hole twice as deep and twice as big, and then fill it with peat moss and compost and a mix of soil, and then put in the tree. The problem is as that settled, the tree would sink and it would promote crown rot. So the way we do it nowadays is you want a hole that's 3 times the size of the root ball, but you want the root ball to sit on firm ground, not compost. And so the root ball sitting on the firm ground, and it should sit, what carpenter friends say, proud. So the crown of the tree right there is above what will be the soil level when you fill back in. And then make sure the root flare, as you can see where the roots first start to come out, is clear. And then you mix the excess soil with a little bit of compost around the plant. And what's important here to remember is these trees have very shallow root systems. So that dish that you've created is where the roots will grow out to immediately. But what you're trying to promote is the tree to grow a very broad root system in all directions. Again, so if you're planted too close to a house, it's going right into your foundation. Now, staking. There are people I've seen with stakes still on trees 3, 4, 5 years later. Stakes should be a temporary assistance to get the tree established, and then you want to get them off the tree within 6 to 12 months. It's important to have at least 2 stakes and to basically have some give in the roping or the material so that the tree can move in the wind and so that you're not rubbing the bark off. But as soon as you're sure that the roots are established, which I do by the wiggle test, get rid of the stakes. Now, the contrary point to that is if you're doing a sidewalk planting and people park at the curb next to the tree, I leave a stake on the curb side to block car doors from hitting the tree. But that isn't to support the tree, that's to protect it. Watering. As I've said before, these trees need a lot of water, and then if it's a hot summer, they need even more. But what you want to do is when you set up your irrigation, when the tree is small, you want the irrigation line to be at the first beginning drip line, but every year you're going to move it out as the tree grows and the branching grows. So before we go to container gardening, that was sort of the summary of what to think about for putting in a new tree. Are there any questions on that, Franklin?
No, some of them are regarding like health of a tree. Someone asked if Marin's in zone 8.
I think we're in zone 9. It depends on where you are in Marin. You can go to the USDA website. There's a place to put in literally a zip code, and it will tell you what zone you're in. Other questions? Okay,
So
So
someone wants to know if they can plant a tree in wet but not flooded area.
I wouldn't, because it could promote root rot and crown rot. You want good drainage. So there are ways to improve the drainage around a tree. If you notice in the winter that the tree is in standing water, I've actually created, call it a dry creek effect, where it wicks the water away. But what that means is you've basically created a very shallow trench downhill away from your tree. But if your tree is at low ground and that's where water pools, I would find the slope side and move the tree to that so it's not in the water.
So someone asked too, what is the wiggle test?
The wiggle. Well, it's not official, but about 6 months into a tree being planted, if you undo the stakes for the moment and move it, if it feels firm, you might be able to remove the stakes. Certainly by 12 months, you should be able to remove the stakes altogether, and the root system has kicked in, and it should be able to hold the plant. It's a light jiggling of the trunk of the tree to see that there's enough support for it to be standing on its own. It's called the wiggle test. It hasn't been published yet.
So someone asked about transplanting a large tree that's next to their house to a better location.
I have done this. It takes 4 or 5 people. You start out about twice the distance of the root line from the root of the drip line from the tree. And I used a fork to turn the soil until we started to see the roots. And then we went down a foot below that and got underneath the root system and kind of used burlap and pulled the burlap along as we went. And we sort of lifted up the root system and slid under the burlap until we had gotten the whole tree. It took hours. And then 5 of us, more or less, dragged the tree to the new location where we had created an equally large space and moved the soil out of the way, slid the new tree in, and tried to get the burlap completely out, which was problematic. And then brought the soil back around. And frankly, we restaked it because even though it was a mature tree, it now wasn't stable. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. I would get help though.
Okay.
Did that make sense, Franklin? Because
yeah, no, that it's something. Yeah, it's something you have to think about if you really want to do.
If you, and make sure that you have a bunch of people who are very strong because it's heavy. The bigger the tree, it's unbelievable. I moved one tree once and then decided I'm not doing that again.
So someone's asking too. She has a sprinkler that's regularly hitting her tree, and she's worried about that.
See, so you don't want to hit the tree. You want to water the soil, not the tree. And so the goal is to make sure that your sprinkler system, if it's one of these that are spraying, it can spray the ground, but don't spray the tree. You don't want water hitting the tree, ideally.
Then we have another one about a good additive for claying soil. How to add it around an established tree.
Oh, so I use a rake and I rough up I pull away the mulch, rough up the soil, spread the fertilizer, and then re-rough the soil and then water that first and then pull the mulch back over. It takes about 15 minutes, but it works very well. Other questions?
Someone's asking, do I just water just at the drip line or from the drip line inward?
Frankly, if you're at the drip line, you're fine. But I know people who coil their irrigation around. So it just depends on how much irrigation line you have. But if you're at the drip line, you should be fine. So Franklin, I'm going to need to jump to containers because it's about a third of the people probably listening.
Okay.
So for an awful lot of you who live in townhouses or condos, or the only sunny spot in your yard is the deck, you can grow citrus trees in containers extremely well. But the larger the container, the better. So a 15 to 25 gallon pot that's 24 by 24 inches in size is optimal. Do not buy those pots with a narrower mouth because you'll never get the tree back out. And be sure that there's enough drainage holes. But I showed you on the earlier slide, almost every variety has a version that will do well in a container. Then the second thing about containers is 8 hours of sunlight or more is what you need. So a south and southwest facing is ideal. The tricky thing about containers is you're watering, and the time that you're watering is less and the frequency is more, because the water will start flowing out the bottom. As soon as it's doing that, it's not doing the tree any good at all. So it's more frequent, shorter duration. And be careful, because we can hit the growth periods for trees are in the winter and spring. And we have, at least in Northern California, winters where suddenly you'll have a month of drought out of the blue. And so keep an eye on that, so that if you need to, you can turn your irrigation back on in the rainy season. Now, I know it is aesthetically pleasing to have a dish that the pot sits in, but you don't want the tree to be sitting in water. So if you are going to need a dish of some sort, you need a way to get the water out of it. And then it's a real problem in the rainy season. So I just recommend to people, have the plant up on feet, but have no dish underneath it so the water can flow through. Use commercially available potting soil, and about every 4 or 5 years, you're going to be finding roots climbing out the bottom. At that point, you turn the plant over on its side, pull it out of the pot. I've spread plastic. Work the soil off the tree and prune the root system. And there are all kinds of Master Gardener videos and instructions on that. And then you put fresh potting soil in and put the plant back into the pot. There's an argument, people use slow release fertilizers or these stakes. And I know a lot of people who fertilize monthly from spring to fall. And one way to do that is with compost tea, because then what you're watering with has the nutrients in it. So that's sort of the summary of a container gardening approach to citrus trees. Are there any questions about the citrus trees in container gardens?
Yeah, someone's asking for containers, buying citrus soil or regular container soil.
I didn't know there was citrus soil. I'd have to look to see what's in it. The truth is that the tricky part is you want something that's nutrient rich, but that drains well. So I would have to look at what's in the citrus soil. I'm not familiar with it, Franklin, sorry.
Okay, so that was right now the only one for containers.
Okay, well, so I wanted to make sure that you understood what to be doing maintenance-wise, pest management, and this is the time to plant new trees. But I urge everyone, in kind of getting your head around this, particularly in Northern California, the last few months have stressed everything in the garden. So pay particular attention. For example, I've seen trees that are covered with ash on the leaves. You may want to wash that off. I've seen other trees that clearly aren't getting enough water. You want to check for that. And then lastly, if your tree is against the house or underneath your eaves, this is the time to really think about either pruning it back for fire safety reasons or considering moving it or planting a new tree further out in the yard where it's safer. Are there any other questions?
There's lots of them, but not about containers.
Oh no, about anything, Franklin. I can.
Let me scroll back up to the top. So,
Oh, I have it now. I've got the Q&A. So what do you do about yellowing and leaf drop? I would look on IPM, but what that usually means is that there's some mineral problem. So you'll want to add more fertilizer, but check on IPM. This is for Rhoda. For Christine, we covered containers. Christine, if you have more questions, just ask. Carmen, a miniature orange tree. That would be a dwarf. I'm not sure what the question is. The fruit takes a while to mature, but it all should mature and ripen over time. Can you transplant? Lisa, I'm not sure what the question is. Can you elaborate?
I thought that was the one earlier about the one by the house.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alicia, you know, the thing about a young tree, first 2 or 3 years, is, you know, the key maintenance is your spring pruning to establish your branching structure. So I'm sorry I didn't do the spring class today, because the real answer to Alicia is, you know, besides watering and fertilizing and making sure that the tree is getting enough nutrients, in the spring, you're going to want to start to establish the branching structure. So come back in the spring and we'll have a spring citrus class. And Carmen, when do you remove the fruit? Well, when it's ripe. So this is my wife and my favorite thing to do, which is we discovered an orange, a Washington navel orange in a bougainvillea in our yard. And when we got rid of the bougainvillea, this tree has sprung up and we have wonderful oranges, but it took us a while to get the hang of when to harvest them. So I just start harvesting one a week until they all start to feel and taste wonderful. And then, you know, it's time. Alicia is asking about differences for feeding or maintaining a young tree. No, it's you're in Nevada in a container. This is where the question becomes, because you're pouring water through, whether you, rather than quarterly, start to do something with either fertilizer stakes or these slow release nutrients. So I would look into those. How and when do you use Epsom salts? I don't know, Rhoda. I'd have to check. Becky wrote, I have seedlings, 3 months old, 2 inches tall, Meyer lemon. It's turning yellow. Time to feed it, Becky. So get citrus food and start to feed it quarterly. Dale had lots of blooms, look great, 4 limes. Okay, so here's the weird thing about citrus. They have this thing where they push out more blooms than they're going to have fruit, and then a bunch of the blooms fall off, and then they push out more baby fruit than they'll actually take to fruition, and then they drop those. So you'll actually see, like, if there are 10 blooms, you'll lose 4 of them, and then if there's 6 fruit, you'll lose 2 or 3, and it's the tree editing as it goes. So that's normal. But as the tree, what you want to do is make sure you're feeding it enough and that it's getting enough sunlight and water, and over time it should increase yield. I hope that answered Dale's question. Dulcie, yes, our clay is terrible, and that's why adding compost is every year is important. But the trick is to make sure that when you plant a new tree, you don't create like a fake environment right around it. you want to mix compost with the existing soil and then keep adding it every year, because the existing soil is terrible in Marin County. Do you need to clean wine barrels before you plant? Any container that you're a little skeptical of, scrub it with water or bleach solution, leave it in the sun till it dries, and you should be good to go. Dulcie wrote back, time to stop fertilizing now. Well, no, I do it quarterly, but if you're in containers, you might be looking at doing it more often. Jenny's saying citrus soil is the same as palm and cactus. Again, I'm not familiar with it. Does air quality affect trees? The answer is yes, and what we're trying to get our heads wrapped around is what are all the effects of smoke. And so I would watch the UC Master Gardener website because I expect that there'll be more information on this in the coming months. This was a particularly bad summer, and so I think we'll have more ideas of what we should be doing. It's not just air quality, it's also ash to pay attention to. Foliar feed. I know this, but it doesn't come to mind. I would Google it, Rhoda, and look up at one of the Master Gardener websites, foliar feeds. Robert is asking about plastic versus terracotta. The advantage of plastic is it doesn't evaporate moisture. So the benefit there is it will require less water to water the plant. And I have friends who've actually put plastic containers inside terracotta so that you have the aesthetics of the terracotta, but the benefits of plastic. What's important is you may have to make sure that they drain correctly in either case, but you should be fine with either, but you will use more water with terracotta. So Anonymous is asking, I'm a novice gardener. How do I prune my lemon tree, which still has abundant fruit on all branches? Wait till spring and take the class. Or look on our website, but you don't want to be pruning right now. This is the height of the production season. So harvest and enjoy and then prune in the spring.
What if someone prunes right now? What would that do to the tree? Would it do anything to it? Would it put it in shock, or will it?
No. I mean, it's just right now is when it's producing the most fruit. So you're just reducing the fruit. But also you want it to be, and it also depends on if it's like a Meyer lemon that's producing year round, whenever you prune, you'll be affecting production. But if it's something where there's an actual season when it's being fruitful, you want to be right after that doing your pruning after harvest. So it depends on which type of tree you're growing. But if it's a lemon tree, likely it's ever blooming. So that's just wait till May. Patricia, would you share your favorite varieties? Well, actually, sure. If you're a container person, the Meyer lemon is wonderful. The Bear's seedless is wonderful as a lime. And you can get, those are the two dominants for containers. Let me go back to the list. In oranges, it's kind of amazing. We grow beautiful blood oranges here. And if you want a grapefruit, you need high heat, but the Oro Blanco grapefruit is delicious. The mandarins do very well here. There's quite a range of ones that do well. But if you're looking for the dwarf varieties, the clementine, the satsuma do very well. Let's see. And if you're in one of the cooler environments, or a container, the Washington Navel is probably our best large sweet orange. Did that help, Christine? A dwarf lime in a container. That would be, I would look for Bears or Mexican lime. Jane Hurt. So sunburn on the bark. This happens in two outcomes. One is if the tree is over pruned, it lets the sun get to the bark, or if you've lifted the skirt high and the sun is hitting the trunk below the branches. If it's the pruning issue, I would wait for the tree to grow back in and then the bark will recover. If it's the skirt is too high, you can use a mixture of white latex paint and water and paint the base of the tree, and that will protect it from sunburn. Christine wanted to know more about leaf miners. I apologize, Christine, but I would just say go to IPM at UC Davis and read up because we're about to run out of time. Wow, there are a lot of questions. Jenny, I planted a new mire during the summer. Now something has been chewing up the newer leaves, which tend to turn yellow. I can't see any bugs. Look up on IPM and look at some insect is eating the leaves, clearly. So I would look there to see what is likely, and then you're going to need to do some spraying this winter. I think the question, Sabina, I was trying to give you a long list of different varieties that do well. So in addition to lemons, limes, and oranges, we have blood oranges, grapefruit, mandarins, kumquats, limequats, orange quats, pomelos, and citron. So that should give you some things to try. Anonymous, we have lots of fruit after bloom on our orange tree. About 90% of the fruit happened. Fell, what happened? That's a lot to fall. So the other thing citrus trees do that's weird is if last year you had a big harvest, then this year you might have a much smaller harvest, and the tree is averaging out. So I would be worried if this happened 2 years in a row. So Anonymous, I would watch to see what happens in the next cycle before I would start doing anything about it. Fern wrote, I moved a very healthy orange tree to a larger pot in April, and as soon as I did, it lost a lot of leaves. Part of that was moving it in April because you're going into the hot season. And part of it is that you probably shocked the tree. So I would continue to feed it and sort of baby it through the winter and see how it is in the spring. Trees, whenever you transplant a tree, they get grumpy. They do not like it. So just kind of bear in mind that you might lose a season every time you do that. Becky wrote, when do they usually flower and how long does it take to harvest? Becky, let me know if we're talking about what type of variety of citrus you're talking about, because they all have different cycles. How far apart should you plant various citrus trees? Yolanda, this is a really important question. If you're putting in a hedge, that's one thing. If you're putting in an orchard, home orchard, that's different. I would seriously recommend both looking on the IPM website for planting instructions, given those different scenarios, and also on Master Gardeners, because what we're trying to do is with fire smart planting is have distance between the branches of trees. So what you're calculating is when the tree is mature, how wide will the branching system be, and therefore how far apart do I need to plant these now, even though they're little trees? Because you're really, to be honest with you, you're planting, everybody plants trees for the next generation. So 20 years from now, how big will this be is the question you should be asking. Alicia asked, how quickly will a tree produce fruit? it should say, I see it in like 2 years to 3 years. Sometimes it's faster. Occasionally it's longer, but most times you should be seeing fruit in 2 to 3 years. Jane asked, do you need to thin out fruit on a tree? Like, no, the tree will do it for you, not to worry. And then there's the question of pruning. How do you identify suckers? Okay, this is the last question. So if you have branches coming out below the graft, automatically prune those away, because that's a sucker coming out of the rootstock, and that will take over the tree over time. So those have to go. Then whenever you prune a citrus, do not prune more than about 10%, 20 on the outside, because the tree will push out a bunch of water shoots. And you have to decide if you want to live with that water shoot or not. But believe me, if you pick a fight with an orange or a lemon or a lime tree over size and water shoots, eventually the tree will wear you down and win. So don't over prune to start, because that's what promotes water shoots. So suckers are the shoots that come out below the rootstock graft, and everything above that are usually water shoots. Okay, so last question. Julie asked, would you be able to post the variety characteristic charts? They'll be posted on YouTube, and you could freeze frame it, and we'll also have them at Marin Master Gardeners. So I want to thank everybody. I know it's been a really hard summer here in Northern California and much of the West. Citrus trees are one of the great joys of living here. So I hope that you enjoy a wonderful fall, winter harvest, and just stay on top of these and take care of them, because they're delightful trees. Franklin, did you have anything to close with?
No, just to make sure you guys, our Marin Master Gardeners, and anybody who wants to, fill out the survey that will be coming in the follow-up email. We'll also have the links to the IPM website and the UC Master Gardeners website in the follow-up. So thank you everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Next Saturday, we have Dot Ingalls, who will be talking about, with Joe Jennings here, who will be talking about the benefits of keeping a garden journal. So make sure you guys sign up for that. I'll have a link to that. And then we'll probably resume our garden talks in January. November and December are going to be a short staffing month for us. So we're going to resume our major programming back in January. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon. So. And
we do want to thank the Larkspur Library for hosting these talks, because when COVID started, this was the only venue in Larkspur, or in Marin County, where we could give lectures and talks, and it's been great. So thank you, Franklin.
No, thank you, Joe. And thanks to the Master Gardeners. You guys have been great, and we can't wait to start some new ones in the new year. So have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you soon. So.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.